Welcome to our second International Mother Language Poetry Cafe, run from Uppsala Center for Literature in Sweden. Today's guest is poet Calvin Wharton from Canada. And in the beginning, we are talking about his authorship and literary works. After our discussion, he is welcome to read some of his poems in English, his mother language. Welcome, Calvin. We have learned a bit about you since you were in Sweden last year on an invitation from our similar literary center in Tranås, in a small Swedish town. And the event was Fringe. And I know you work as an editor for a literary journal. You work as a teacher on creative writing at university and college level. Then you yourself write both non-fiction and fiction and mostly poetry. Would you like to tell us how did you or why did you begin to write poetry? Very briefly.
Okay, that's a good question, and has a sort of maybe a long, windy answer. That when I was young, I became very interested in writing, and I always felt that poetry was sort of the ultimate, the supreme language art. So I wrote a lot of very terrible. I filled notebooks with very bad poems, many pages and pages of poems that are not sort of more like a self-apprenticeship. And eventually I did a number of different kinds of jobs before I became a teacher. I worked in a sawmill. I worked on a ranch. I worked as what's called a sandblaster, where you're I was cleaning parts for an oil refinery thing. So I did a lot of physical jobs. But I always knew that that's not what I wanted to do, that I wanted to get involved with writing. And so I heard about a program that was opening up in the sort of more interior part of the province that I live in. I live in British Columbia, which is on the west coast of Canada. And I decided that I would try to get into this writing program that was opening up. And I interviewed with the chair of the program and got into that program. And that made a huge difference in my life, because I not only, I was dedicating myself to studying writing and learning about writing and writing. And I also worked with and met a number of writers and artists. It was the school I went to was basically an art school. So there was creative writing, theater, music, design and art and all those kinds of things. And so it was a great environment for me. And that was a kind of starting point for me.
And how old you were then when it was?
I was 29 when I first went into that program.
Okay, then next interest for us to know how much it is a need for a writer or an individual going to be writer to get enrollment on creative writing education.
To get what? Sorry.
What is the need for a writer to go to a course or to be educated on creative writing, since you both is a poet and also is a teacher on creative writing?
Okay, this is another good question, because there's two sort of camps around this question in Canada. Some people say, oh, you don't need to go to a creative writing program. Other people and myself, I feel that when you study creative writing in a good program, you're in an environment that's sort of kind of fast forwards you through a lot of things that you might discover on your own, you might not. I mean, obviously people, writers in the past didn't study at a creative writing program. There were none, you know, maybe 100 years ago or whatever. But they were studying in a different kind of way. And really, everyone is, you can't start writing without studying writing. You have to understand how it works and understand, you know, what works for you, where your place is in that. Being in a writing program is kind of an accelerated way to deal with that issue. And plus you're in a kind of a hotbed of an environment for, if you're lucky, you're a good creative environment where you're sort of encouraged both by your instructors and your peers, but also by your own, just the stuff that's swirling around all around you that makes you feel like you've got something to do and you got to get down to work. So I think I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and would you like to tell us the contemporary literary scene in your country right now? Is it growing or narrowing or digitalization, publication, festivals, magazines, in a brief?
There's everything that's going on there. There's a digital world. There's a kind of people who are involved in, especially right now, a lot of setting up online readings and so on, and even book launches are online now because people can't meet in person here. So there's that going on. There's also kind of a range, because Canada is different from Sweden, maybe, or at least traditionally what Sweden was, where we don't have I mean, originally there were the Aboriginal people here, and those folks are now coming out with a lot of very strong writing. Presently, the poet laureate of Canada is an Aboriginal woman, Louise Bernice Half. She's also a poet. We have a lot of different ethnic backgrounds represented in Canada, and so a lot of those people, there's a kind of a real vibrant scene, or not scene, a real vibrant situation where people from all different kinds of ethnic and cultural backgrounds are speaking up and being recognized and being published. And so we have a real diversity of voices and approaches, I would say, right now.
And since you are also an editor for a literary journal, and what is the role literary journals can play to promote writing, or what is the need?
Well, they're almost like a kind of I guess a kind of a tool, I think, for beginning writers, where a lot of the journals in Canada can they focus not just on experienced writers, but also new writers, right? And so that gives people a chance to get published. It's a way for the word to get out. This is a big country, Anasur.
Yeah.
From one side of this country to the other, it's like 5,000-6,000 kilometers. So it's hard it's hard for people to physically get together. So it's easier now with things like the internet. But until now, the literary journals were kind of newspaper in a way, right? They were kind of getting the news out, the literary news. That was the way to find out who's writing and what writing there is going on in the country.
Yeah, in the French tradition, even British tradition, and also these South Asian traditions, the main newspaper usually have literary supplements every weekend, but not in Scandinavian tradition, not in Sweden and other countries in Scandinavia. And what is the condition or environment in Canada? Do the mainstream literary newspapers publish literary supplements or not?
Not exactly. There is a variety. Again, there's a variety of things, but I would say that some of the journals have disappeared recently. I think it's Sorry, I need to. The writing is not something that actually, especially poetry, so is not considered in the mainstream here, really. I mean, poets are definitely in a minority in this country, even among writers, and most of the people who write poetry. I remember years ago, one of my teachers going to, this was back in the 1980s, so it's quite a long time back. I'm a little older than you, so we were at a launch of one of his books, and he said, it was a very large crowd, and he said, I think I know who all of my readers are, and I can see all of them in the audience here, because and he's somebody who's very highly regarded, Fred Waugh. He was eventually became one of the poet laureates of Canada. But we have also in Canada, we have two official languages, as you probably know, French and English. So that the literary scene in Quebec, which is the French, the Francophone literary scene, is very, very vital and very lively, and the whole art scene there, and it's not something that I know that much about. I'm very because my French is not really good enough to go really deep in terms of reading. But so that there's two sort of communities that are happening in Canada, and they both have their own sort of vitality. But again, like I said, poetry is something that the people who are interested and involved in it are ferociously involved in it. But for a lot of people, it's not something that they're interested in. It's just considered a kind of outlier, I guess.
You mentioned one thing is like poetry or poet is a minority existence, or in most countries the book market or particularly the poetry position of poetry is going to be narrowed, for example in the bookshops. But still every year many collection of poems are coming out. And what is the situation in Canada?
Oh, there are many books. I can't, you can't keep up. I did back when I first started, was first in that creative writing program I mentioned. I felt like I had a sort of a much better handle on the sort of the range and scope of writing in the country, but it's just, it has exploded, that's an irony, right? That when I say on one hand that poetry is an outlier, but actually there's probably way more people writing and publishing poetry now than there were 40 years ago in this country. And like I said, there are all these new voices, or voices, they're not new. I mean, they're new to maybe to people like myself, right? So there's always been, say, for example, in Vancouver, where I live, there's a very large Punjabi community, and they have their own group of writers that are writing actually in Punjabi and also in English, and they have their own a pretty strong group of people working there, and I think that's sort of duplicated in different ways across the country. As I don't know if it's the same in Sweden, I imagine it is, but it's the small literary presses that are really doing the work that keeps all this alive, that publishes most of the poetry, and people that work in that area that are do it mostly. They don't do it because they're going to get rich, because they're not going to. They do it because they love poetry and they feel it's important.
In Sweden, there is two parallel literary scenes. One is grassroots and very flexible, vibrant, and growing. The other one is very institutional and Stockholm-centric, very it's kind of monopoly. For example, the number one Swedish publisher, they have a control of over 60% of whole book market in Sweden. Can you imagine what sort of monopoly? over 60% of whole book market is controlled by one publishing house. Then rest is the whole country. Then there are hundreds of publishers who are not member of the publishing organizations. They have very few members and they have the monopoly and institutional control. This is the very imbalanced book market in Sweden.
I think we have a similar kind of situation here where the I think the big publishers, I think, what is it Bertelsmann, who own Hachette and Penguin. They just bought Penguin Random House here and that, so they do sort of monopolize that end of the thing. But like I said, the people that are publishing poetry and a lot of the new exciting writers are coming out of the small presses and the small magazines and so on, like you say. So it's probably a lot like the situation in Sweden.
Yeah. Anyway, would you like to tell about your ongoing writing project?
Yes, I have just completed a manuscript, although I'm still tinkering with it because it won't be published until next year, 2022. My next book. It's manuscripted poetry, and my publisher decided that it would be better to publish after the when the sort of, we don't have it exactly a lockdown here, but we do have restrictions on gatherings, and when that's over, he felt that it would be a better time to publish. So we're waiting until 2022. So it's a collection of poems. It's called This Here Paradise, which is kind of I think that we have to always keep in mind that we live in a paradise. This world is a paradise. We have to take good care of it, and we have to acknowledge that and remember that. Always be reminded of that. But at the same time, there's a lot of things in paradise. It's not a religious book of religious poems or anything like that. It has range. I have one section that's called Gym Rat, because I play I play basketball, I play badminton, and I spend time in gyms, in gymnasiums. So I wrote some poems about those experiences. I have a section of poems about birds, because of course you can't have a paradise without birds. And when I had a chapbook, what we call a chapbook here, I think I'm not sure what you call it in Sweden. In the UK, I think they call it a pamphlet, but we call it a chapbook of poems that are just about birds. And the reason I did that is because when I published my previous book, and the designer was showing me designs for the cover, I noticed all the designs had birds in them, and I didn't know why. And he said, "Well, you got a lot of birds in your poems." And I didn't even realize it was unconscious that I was doing that. So I went back and looked, and I said, "Yeah, I do." So I decided I would write a collection of poems just about birds. So I did that, and that was published as a chapbook. And some of those poems and some newer ones, will also be in this new collection.
When is your next book coming?
I think it will be in the spring of 2022.
Okay, so advanced congratulations. We are looking forward to reading that book. Now, would you like to read some of your poems?
Sure. I'll start with a bird poem, since I was just talking about that. So this is a short poem that was inspired by something that was in the newspaper here. And I'll just read you a bit from the clip from the newspaper. This was in the Vancouver Sun. It says, a Vancouver resident has been fined for trying to smuggle a suitcase full of songbirds into the city from China. And the poem's called Suitcase Full of Birds. 9 and 20 old world birds, chosen for their intonation, a mix of babblers and flycatchers, melodious laughing thrushes, red-billed leothrix and oriental magpie robins. He sedated and wrapped each in a sock, then slipped them into carry-on luggage. lined up like keys on a piano, dreaming melodies and harmony of morning light and fragrant breeze. On the aircraft, he lifted his case carefully into an overhead compartment with other bags. Who knows what might have been in them? Souvenirs, photographs of family, a jacket, a pair of silk pajamas. He made no sound while the birds slept across the Pacific. They had no passports or travel plans, flying without flying, the irony not available to them until the bag was opened and they began to sing. Next, I'll read a poem that one of my concerns or interests is connected with one of my teachers and very good friend, Tom Wayman, who's a highly regarded Canadian poet, and one of his interests is people writing about the work that they do, because he feels that that it's something that is often ignored, as if it's not a valid thing to write about. So this comes from my my work as a teacher, and it's called Office Hours, Elijah. Also begins with a quote. This begins with a quote from Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida. That spirit of his in aspiration lifts him from the earth. Every few weeks, for months after he has left my class, Elijah shows up at my office door, returns not in flames, but with dust and cookie crumbs down the front of his raven print t-shirt, to once again ask familiar questions, make the same comments regarding whatever he is studying at the moment, wonders if he's ready to enroll in my advanced course. He travels always alone along the college hallways, head tilted back to see the world through the bottom of his glasses, lenses streaked and smeared with fingerprints he must peer through, as if the answer to his queries could best be found underneath life's smudge-rimed surfaces. What he really wants is to free his voice, let his words emerge without laughter from his elders at his aspirations. They tell him he's not seeing things clearly, while he wanders and prays for a miracle he knows is waiting to lift him, glorious, from the weight of his own breath. And I'll read one more poem, and this is also no, I think I'll read this poem. That's and it's what I call an instructional poem. And when I taught, I had an assignment for my students called an instructional poem, because I said everybody knows how to do something. So if you want to have a particularly for beginning students, beginning writers, they often say, "Oh, what should I write about? I don't know." I said, "Well, everybody knows how to do something." So I sort of sketched out different ways that you could write what we call an instructional poem. And so this is one of those, which is, it's not exactly what's in the poem is sort of metaphorical as well as real. So it's called Do This, Do That. Exercise 1. Write a poem that works the upper body, lifts words confidently from the solar plexus. Notice how your muscles respond, all that resistance building outward from your lexicographic core, to remind you where you are until your arms tremble with the discovery of each new line. Exercise 2. Imagine you have lost connection to gravity, a condition that has developed so gradually you didn't notice it was underway, and now can't tell if you're floating or standing firmly on the ground. Then reach back to gather the knotted rope of images bunched behind you. Feel the warmth that spreads into your hands the way water fills a container. Use this rope to pull the room, the world, closer until you know how to begin your poem. Exercise 3. Take a pen out to the garden. Use it like a shovel to raise and turn the soil there. Find yourself mining rows of emerald green, stem and leaf. Shake free the words and phrases you discover. Arrange them as you like, in sequences that surprise, and if you're lucky, delight. Feel the force of something new growing from that rich, dark ground. Exercise 4. Begin seated in prayer position, an ideal means to discover the language of devotion. Pay attention to your body, pushing down against the floor, and slowly raise your hands to brush imaginary clouds drifting effortlessly above you. Effortlessness behavior begs imitation, so pause to observe this moment, its structure and substance. Begin your poem naturally, as it almost forms itself in the air before you, as simply as breathing. Thank you.
Thank you, Colvin. Hope to see you again in place somewhere in Sweden or
I hope so.
yeah. And good luck with your new book and writing.
Thank you.